Hello. Thank you so much for attending this wonderful event today and for making our event more special. I'm Aritra Sarkar, and my fellow panelists have been introduced. Firstly, I have to start by saying that the books that the three of you have written, one of which was co-authored by the two of you, and the other one, of course, is by Akshay. These books are extremely iconic, in my opinion, and they present something which is very salient today, which is how to do business in a very transforming landscape. And so to just start this conversation, I'd like to throw open a question to both of you, and please feel free to jump in. And it's a question which I think, which is on everyone's mind today, at least in the corporate world. And the question is that in this age, in an age where AI is going to become preeminent and extremely powerful, how do human employees add value in the workplace? So I'd like to lead this conversation with this question.
Yeah, thank you for asking this very pertinent question, which a lot of people are wondering about. I think from the work that I do and having interacted with people on a daily basis, the human touch is not going to go away. Right? So I'm a leadership coach, and very often people say, I can go into ChatGPT and ask a question about getting a solution to my problem, but I don't get that warmth, connection, empathy that a human being on the other side can actually give me. So it's very ironic. On one hand, we want connection, through Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram. On the other hand, we're getting more disconnected. So I think as AI becomes more prominent, it's important for human beings to become more human. Otherwise, we will not have an edge. We can't be robots. We need to be very, very clear that there is a distinction. So which is why our book is about nurturing yourself, nurturing others, which we believe only a human can do. And the more we do that, the more we invest in ourselves, at least we can give the right prompts to the chatbots, to AI. Otherwise, I think we will soon be in a world where they can easily take over and run us as well.
Akshay, what does it, I mean, she raised a very good point there. What does it mean, in your opinion, to be human in this corporate world and to become more human?
I think there's a great connection with the previous session where what we know about AI at the moment is that it's very, very good at pattern recognition based on data that it already has. But it's still not doing original thinking. And what the last session was about was that we are a civilization of original thinkers. And I think that there's a friend of mine who gives this stock answer whenever anyone asks him about law and AI, that lawyers are not going to be replaced by AI. Lawyers are going to be replaced by lawyers who work with AI. And what it does is it's making us more efficient. What it's doing is it's taking away at the moment some of the more tedious parts of the job and allowing the space for those who choose to do that, because you can choose to be lazy, or you can choose to use that time that it frees up to do some original thinking. So I'm at the moment, my experience of both working with it myself and of colleagues who use it, is that it's very, very initial, and it's just helping us at this stage being more efficient than we were.
I think that's very well said. So we don't have to worry about, I think, AI taking over the world, so as to speak. I think we need to be worried more about upgrading ourselves further, right? I think.
Yes, and I think AI is one tool. There are many, many others. And I think that still what I find, and the advice I give any young lawyer who's getting into the profession, and they say, okay, I've got 6 months, or I've got a summer holiday before I join my job, what book should I be reading? I just say, read the economic newspapers, read The Economist, figure out the world that exists around your work, because if you are not connected with that work, you're going to be, you may be very deep on some topics, but you won't be able to place your work in a wider context, which is still where the best lawyers, I feel that's the space in which you play.
Great. In the nurturing quotient, which I think as a book, it's extremely salient today, even more than ever before, simply because there doesn't seem to be the same emphasis on growing other people. It's more about yourself, and about replacing people with higher productive tools. Tell me one thing, one question which comes up to mind. Are leaders born or made?
I think all leaders are born. That's how we come into this world. And then after that, it depends upon what we do that shapes us as a leader.
Are we all born as leaders?
I think we're all born with the potential to lead. Right? And what we do with that potential depends upon a whole lot of things, right? Environment, upbringing, surroundings, our worldview, the opportunities we've taken, the opportunities we've been given. And for me, I do leadership development work, so I have to believe that leaders can be made. And even if you come with a certain set of qualities, if you don't nurture and build that, if you don't cultivate it, it can get lost very, very easily. So I think, work with what you've been given, but you can definitely learn skills, you can adopt a different mindset, and that's the work, we do when we do leadership development work, is to take whatever strengths you have, but also help you to become better and overcome any blocks. So I certainly believe leaders start with a particular skill set, a set of inherited characteristics, but we can certainly build and develop that. If I didn't believe that, I would be out of job and not make any money.
Great. Akshay, in your book, meritocracy is a very, very important theme, especially when you talk about navigating this very complex terrain of the legal industry, legal profession, when you're beginning, and more from the point of view of maybe an outsider to some degree. I could get that sense in the book. So what were your perceptions about the state of meritocracy in the Indian legal firms when you first started out? And how did the state of meritocracy change in the industry up to the time when you started Trilegal?
Well, I have to be very careful to say, not to say things which put down anyone else. But I think I think the legal profession wasn't all that different from various other parts of Indian culture and society, and within the economy itself. You had lots of legacy companies. Even today, 75% of the stock market is family firms. And in fact, family firms do quite well. But what you'll find is that family firms aren't those small family firms that they used to. There's a whole bunch of professional management that sits below that. And to me, there is no doubt in my own mind, from my own personal experience, that 1991 and liberalization was a big moment. There is nothing like competition to make people absolutely, it becomes essential for you to consider meritocracy if there is competitive pressure upon you, because you want to have the best lawyers, because you want to serve the best clients and do the best transactions. And if you don't, best lawyers are not just clever people who are willing to sit quietly and know their place. The best lawyers are people who are ambitious, not only in terms of providing the best advice, but making the best versions of themselves, which includes not just working on transactions, but becoming leaders. And if the glass ceiling is so low that when you get out of your chair and stand up, you hit it, then it's not, meritocracy is not going to work. So when we started, it was the early days of liberalization. It was still about not yet a decade old. So the impact was just beginning to be felt. But over the 25 years that the firm has been around, I think that meritocracy has become far more important because the market demands it. And that's because of competition.
Yes. Here I wanted to, I think, extend this particular question, I think maybe to you. And the question which comes up is that, is there a dark side to meritocracy? So in other words, I've noticed when I was in the corporate world, I don't know what your thoughts are, that it seems that there are maybe 10 or 15% of people, they perform well, and they seem to hog most of the benefits. And the remaining 80%, for some reason or the other, they get demotivated and they stop performing. Now, this I've seen happening in a so-called meritocratic system. But do you feel that that is because of meritocracy, or is that a dark side of meritocracy? I wanted to ask you.
Thanks, Dan. I think that's an interesting point, and that's a debate that we could keep having. But like everything else, I believe that there is the operative word here is the and the balance, right? So anything that is taken to an extreme is likely to have detrimental consequences to it. So if you look at organizations, I mean, when we do appraisals, right? Why do we have a bell curve? Because we believe that there are certain people who need to fit in both ends of the spectrum, and there is a whole bunch of people sitting in between, right? So in a way, we are sort of fueling a bit of a segregation in terms of how we evaluate people and how we reward people, etc. But having said that, and having run companies, I think the important thing is not to mix it up with nepotism or any other favoritism that we might bring to the table, right? So two things that work well is, one, are we establishing the right culture in the organization, which facilitates performance-based reward system, right? Second is, one of the things we did at Perfetti is we moved away from individual awards to team awards, because ultimately nobody can do something just by themselves. So over a period of time, we said, let's have cross-functional teams working on something so that we are able to build that breaking of silos and the collaborative culture in the organization, which then gets rewarded, and that has a virtuous cycle built into the system. So I think that really helps from that perspective.
I'd like to actually come back to you, and I think you can probably, with your smile, you're probably figuring out what I'm going to say. But in your book, one of the fascinating things which I read is the incentives, is the whole incentive structure to reward, to reward lawyers. And you experimented with various forms of this incentive structure, from individual contributions to team to a combination of that. If you can just going back to this meritocratic question, because the question of the incentives came in. What was your learning from this tweaking of the incentive structures, and did you come up with a perfect, incentive scheme as a result?
It's never perfect, and I think the acknowledgement that it's never perfect is what has kept us honest and reasonably successful. You need to respond to the changes within your organization, the changes in the market, and the changes of the aspirations of a generation. But if you going back to the book, one of the central themes that runs through it is the conflict, not the conflict, but the need for this constant balance between meritocracy and collegiality.
Yes, that's right.
And in any professional services organization, as Rajesh was just saying, you need teamwork is important, and there is a sense that you need to create within people that the whole matters more than the individual, and the incentive scheme needs to reflect both. So the principle that we started off with both the principle of collegiality and the principle of meritocracy, and the attempt has been to constantly balance the two. And the way it works is that as you're broadly speaking in our partnership structure, as a young partner, you're evaluated more on the work that you do and some amount of work that you pass on to other partners. But as you get more senior, there's more emphasis placed in percentage terms of the work that you pass on to other partners. And at a couple of critical phases in your progression through the partnership, it's evaluated as to whether you've created another partner from within your own practice or not, because any one person can only work so many hours a day and supervise so many people. So the way for the pie to be grown in a system which, importantly, our system is, which is everything is put into a pie and shared out of it, in that sort of system, the pie has to grow, and the only way for it to grow is by having more partners. So the incentives, as you go through, not only over our own history, but over the history of each individual lawyer partner within the firm, the incentives move from being slightly more focused on yourself to being slightly more focused on the whole. And as you become more senior, to being largely focused on the whole.
Coming to a very important question, which I think is of relevance to our audience today, many of whom are from schools and colleges from around the state and the country. How do you manage Gen Z employees? Is it the carrot stick or something else entirely?
I think, again, a very relevant question in today's context, and I'm reminded of something that one of the Gen Z employees told me a few years ago, which is, I choose to volunteer my time to the organization if I deem fit, right? It was a very interesting way of putting it versus people like us who grew up, putting our nose to the ground and just grinding through and doing whatever it takes to make our way through the corporate ladder. So I think one of the important things is for us to be able to understand the drivers, the derailers, the motivators of Gen Z. I mean, we have a Gen Z at home. Our daughter is 24, and I think that's great in-house learning that we have over the last few years in terms of how they work. And then once we understand them, we are able to see how we need to, do some of the stuff in the organization, which sort of speaks to their drivers and motivators and get the best out of them. And I'll just share a small example. So we have a management team in Perfetti, right? There's senior people in sales, marketing, supply chain, and so on and so forth. One of the things that I created when I was running the company was we had a YCOM. So we had a ManCom, but we created something called YCOM, which the criteria was you need to be between 25 and 30 to be a part of that. So from every function, we picked one person in that age group. So you had a young marketing head, young sales head, and so on and so forth. And their job was to feed to us what was going on in the world as far as from a lens of a 25-year-old. And we could then use that to say, what do we need to do in terms of policy changes? What do we need to do in terms of the systems and processes and so on and so forth? So I think keeping eyes, ears open, getting reverse mentoring from them are many ways in which we could be connected with Gen Z so that we are able to build a much more inclusive workspace.
I think the dialogue-based approach is what
Absolutely.
you're saying, is where it's a conversation rather than top-down, telling people
Yes,
what to do. I think
yes.
that's definitely seems to be the
Absolutely.
undercurrent.
And
you
if
know.
I can, add to that, the interesting thing, because I do a lot of sessions, in fact, on diversity, inclusion, unconscious bias, is for the older people, and I'll put myself in that category, to become aware of the biases we have about the younger people. Very often we get the same dialogue that I worked so hard, in my time it wasn't like that. These people are not loyal, they are so entitled. So I always say, first, see, are we biased about them just because they are young? And second, respect. Respect every individual, no matter what age, gender, where they come from. And I think if that is there, then you don't have to manage. You can actually lead, inspire, and get them to do, what it is that needs to be done.
Akshay, you would say that in the legal firm, you are an entrepreneur in a true sense of the word, And tell me one thing. How does unfamiliarity between the founders, can that drive a business to succeed, or would it be a stumbling block?
You touch upon something that I learned while writing the book, because I'd not done any studies on management theory. I only sort of looked at what management thinkers would say out of the corner of my eye. Because when you're busy doing work on a day-to-day basis, you don't really have the headspace to, and it's not a subject of natural interest to me. I read a lot, but it's not an area in which I read. But here's where AI helped me a lot. What I would do is I'd write a chapter which would be my recollection of the way things went. And then I'd ask Perplexity, I said, are there any thinkers who've written about what I've talked about in this chapter? And it would say, here's a bunch of articles. And I'd read the articles, and I discovered this lovely theory, which is called the strength of weak ties, by this guy called Mark Granovetter. And what it says is that if you go into business with a very close friend, a childhood friend, or someone who you're on very, very familiar terms with, if something starts going wrong, you have the liberty to get angry with them. You can lose your temper, you can shout. But if you don't know people all that well, if you're a little more distant from them, you will be a little more formal, you will be a little more accommodating, and you'll be a little more willing to accept their views, because it's like someone you meet on a plane, and if you get into a chat with them, if you have a disagreement of opinion, you'll express that disagreement cautiously. And that's it's in the same vein, that thought. And I don't know whether this is generalizable to everyone's experience, but certainly true of my experience, because there were 6 of us, and some people were college friends, or at least they knew each other from college, but again, they were not closest friends. So in our case, I think, just from experience, we were more accommodating. One of the things I like to say is one of the reasons we stayed together is because each one of us has given up something at some point in time, which was really important to us, but we felt in that moment it was more important to the other person. And for close friends, sometimes counterintuitively, you're not willing to do that. In personal situations, you might be, but in a business situation, you're more sort of inclined to, you could be more inclined to say, no, I think I'm right, and dig your heels in.
Great. Mental health today is a very important topic. At least it's front and square center than ever before. Firstly, is it a new thing in that regard? What are corporations doing to ameliorate it? And what should some of the things that people who are suffering from mental health within organizations, within companies do in order to sort of get relief?
Yeah, so I think mental health, if you say issues have always been there. We just never spoke about it, right? People were sad, unhappy, stressed, anxious, frustrated, but there was a lot of stigma around even admitting I have a mental health issue. I'm very happy to say that at least post-COVID, we've seen a shift. People are more vocal. They're talking about it. There is less shame about it. You know, celebrities like Deepika Padukone and all have come out and said these are issues. So I think it's great that we are looking at it. We are addressing it. And I work with a lot of organizations who are very serious about doing something for it. So I think right from having therapists on calls, many organizations actually allow their employees to consult with an in-house therapist or support days off, personal days off. I mean, those were not things which we did when I started working. So I see a lot more openness to that. I think at the same time, we don't want to let things become a mental health issue. Right? People suffer from toxic bosses. Unfortunately, people have been driven to extreme, levels like suicide because their work environment was toxic, people were not kind, bosses were too hard. So I think rather than wait for it to become an issue, that's what we talk about in the nurturing quotient is how can we support people to proactively nurture themselves. So I think individual has to take a responsibility as well, that I'm fit, I'm eating well, I'm getting the support I want, I'm having a close group. And then secondly, build a culture where there is something called psychological safety, where people are comfortable coming and talking about things rather than waiting for a nervous breakdown, rather than waiting for a mental health issue. And I'm talking about these typical issues, not a deep psychological disorder where you need to get professional help. So I think just supporting people from day one and normalizing this is very important, and a lot of organizations are doing that quite proactively. But we feel that you just need to train the leaders and managers to be more compassionate, empathetic, even as you drive for results. That will help a great deal in having a not just profitable organization, but a joyful, thriving work environment.
It's very well said. Uh, Tell me, Akshay, how do you navigate uncomfortable questions between founders?
Well, I think we're like an old married couple now, where either you don't ask the question because you know what answer you're going to get, you don't bother,
You hide the question.
or you just anticipate the answer, deal with your own response to that potential hypothetical answer, and move on. Or you bring it up and you hash it out. But we, amongst the founders, I'm really happy to say that we really don't have a whole lot of these sorts of issues anymore. The more complicated things are how do you deal with the aspirations of younger partners? How do you deal with the fact that partners are going to get wealthier today a lot earlier than we did, for example? So how do you keep people motivated? In fact, that's one of the big learnings for me through my own experience, is that beyond a certain level of financial comfort, other things matter enormously even in the corporate world. And it's a mistake many organizations make by saying that, oh, I've got a really good performer, I'm going to just throw more money at them. But most people, 80% of the people, maybe more, I would say more, want to go into work feeling that it's a place where the other people are thinking and working towards similar objectives. So the spirit of collaboration and teamwork is something that I feel is an enormous motivator after a certain level of financial comfort. I'm not a saint. I don't believe that if you just hold hands and sing praises to the Lord that everything will be all right. But if you're reasonably financially comfortable, people want this feeling of working towards a common cause. And this is the kind of thing that you use to navigate difficulty, is this idea that you're working towards something in common. And the fact that you can get a lot of commercial success doing that. And one of the reasons that I wrote the book is to say that, look, it's, if we had started with this model and we'd created a sort of a nice boutique firm which was doing all right, that was one thing. But we've created possibly the largest firm in the country with this model. And that, I think, is a positive message for people in professional services organizations, that actually this is good business. It's not just nice to have.
It's very well said. Tell me, Rajesh, in companies today, are they doing enough to make work joyful for others?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think a lot of it actually flows from the leader, the personality of the leader, the way the leader approaches the work. So, for example, I've worked for 30 years, and for me, even during COVID, when I was running the company, every day when I was going to work, I used to get up and say, I want to go to work today, because what is it that I'm going to do there, to impact the people in my organization, the business, and the community at large, right? So I think it's really about leader and the top leadership setting the tone and the pace for the organization. A few things. I mean, if you work from a fear of failure, it's obviously not going to be very helpful. But in Marico, one of the things that I learned and which I successfully used in the rest of in my career as well is this whole art of prototyping. We can keep intellectualizing on something works, doesn't work, pros, cons, etc. But go and try it out. Try it out in a limited geography, in a limited market. Do it, learn from it, fail fast, get your learnings, and move on, right? And if you're able to bring something like that to the table, people are not worried about what happens if I fail, but rather they are looking forward to the joy of experimenting, right? And for that, I think just going back to what Nirupama said earlier, are we able to provide the psychological safety as leaders so that they can voice their opinion, they can go try out stuff. And I think there is a joy in experimenting, discovering, learning, and growing. So it's a lot to do with the leader and, of course, individuals in terms of the culture that we build in the organization, which can actually make work very joyful, right? So, I mean, my last job, I was working with Perfetti, and we sell Alpenliebe, Mentos, and so on and so forth. But we never said we sell candies or chewing gum. We used to say that we sell affordable moments of happiness for people, right? Now, if you define your purpose of your work slightly differently in terms of the impact that you create versus the physicality of the product of the service, that itself can be a great way to make work joyful. So it's really a question of perspective.
So if I can sort of summarize that, what you said in 3 words, which is a culture with passion. Would you agree with that characterization?
Yeah. So not to take away from performance. So there is performance, passion, and the culture needs to sort of reflect and amplify that.
So in other words, does performance follow or does passion follow?
I think it's a virtuous cycle which sort of feeds into each other. You have passion leading to performance. That performance has sort of a feedback mechanism which further fuels the passion, and that sort of makes it a virtuous cycle.
Okay. Now, Nirupama, you write in this book that the new paradigm of leadership is an accent on being rather than doing. This is a beautiful, I think, encapsulation of philosophy. If you can please explain that and talk about if there's a playbook to help this happen within organizations at scale.
Yeah. That comes from something which I've seen and we both believe in, which is who you are is how you lead. Right? So when you look at leaders, they bring their personality to leadership. Right? So Elon Musk, just to use a well-known example, has a particular style, which is true to who he is. At the same time, you will find, let me take Sundar Pichai, will lead in a slightly different way. Or Ratan Tata is a great leader, Mukesh Ambani leads in a slightly different way. So you can say who you are is how you lead. So that's where the being starts. So we always encourage, not leaders, but everybody, start with self-awareness. So that's the playbook, really. So when I do leadership workshops, it always starts with lead self before you go and lead others. So understand the being. What is the being? It's nothing but a mix of all your mindsets, values, perspective, fears, thoughts, everything. And if you can figure that out, then the way you show up as a leader will be very different from a person who is not really self-aware. So that's the being part that we talk about. And when we interviewed leaders, we could definitely say many of them who we now see as successful have invested in this. So it's not going to happen like that, but taking the time out, introspecting, figuring out who you are you authentic? Are you faking? I think these are some of the things that help you to have the right response at the right time. Right? So that's the being.
That's wonderfully said. Akshay, I wanted to, in your book, there's something deeply touched me, which is this whole aspect of strangers and of being open to strangers. It is coming through in your book, whether you realize it or not, And I wanted to actually ask about that. the importance of openness to strangers, what are the benefits and pitfalls in the ultimate analysis?
I think there's only benefit. My daughters, you have got a daughter who's 24. I've got 4 daughters who are roughly in the same age. And they get very irritated with me because whenever if I'm at a airport or with a butcher or in a shop, I always speak to everybody because I just find that I'm there in that moment and I want to have the best moment that I can. And I realized later that this is what I was doing and that the way to do it is just to speak to whoever's with you. And if you decide that you want something big out of that moment, you may be disappointed and therefore fearful of doing it. But if you don't care, if you say, look, I'm just chatting to someone, if I get something out of it, great. If I don't mind. And the same attitude I think I have to, and I think luckily many of my colleagues have, is towards trust. I mean, you give your trust, and if someone betrays it, I see it as their problem, not yours. And you will protect yourself in a commercial context to some extent from the fallout of that trust being betrayed. But I find that it's much easier on yourself to trust people and to be open and then be prepared to be let down. And once in a while that will happen. But the majority of times you'll get much more out of life and out of work if you're prepared to do that. So I think that might be where this is coming from.
But I think it is very difficult realistically in terms of, because human nature is that if we do well with someone, we tend to take them for granted after a certain point. But even one instance of being let down can lead to the relationship or lead to our opinions being completely, reversed. And I think the solution to that is probably self-trust, is being able to trust yourself so that you can trust others. What do you think about that?
So yeah, just to go back on the stranger point, and I just want to share with everybody, social experiment I did recently. So after having written the book, and I was reading another book, the happiness of pursuit. So there was a thought that came to my head. So what I did from 4th November to 4th December was every day I picked a random stranger and went up to them and asked them 3 questions. What do you do to nurture yourself? How do you take care of others? And what gives you happiness? And my intention was to try and see if I can get out of comfort zone and actually just go and talk to strangers. So I spoke over the 30 days to a teacher in Meghalaya, a Swiggy guy in Chennai, an auto driver in Bombay, an author in Delhi, and so on and so forth. And one of the things, back to your point, is, yes, if we are able to get ourselves out of the comfort zone, I believe that's where the greatest learning lies. And the interesting thing about it was, not one of the 30 people said, sorry, I don't have time for a conversation. Because very often, we just take it for granted and we assume that the other person would reject or the other person would have a different view, and we put on our own self-limiting beliefs to that, right? So I think if we are able to get out of comfort zone, take that first step and go forward, I think there's a lot of things that we can discover for ourselves which will help nurture us and nurture others as well.
I just quickly add to that. I think we often think that people are thinking more about us than they actually are. People are not bothered about you so much. So instead of that, if you focus on them instead of yourself, I think the wonderful things can happen.
Correct. So you have to, I think, approach with a sense of empathy. I think that's
openness.
And openness, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit about empathy, and the importance of and how you can actually cultivate empathy within a competitive environment.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing was when we interviewed 117 leaders, empathy was the quality that was mentioned most often by them. And so we have a model we call HOPE, H-O-P-E, in order to be a nurturing leader: humility, openness, patience, and empathy, right, in order for you to be nurturing. And what we saw was empathy is not a soft, touchy-feely kind of a skill or a quality. It's really very, very powerful, because what empathy does is to create connection, and it fuels innovation. So if you look at design thinking model, it actually starts by understanding, hey, what's a problem the other person is going through, and feeling for them, and then coming up with a solution for that. Like, I don't know if any of you have seen this movie, Padman. It was very interesting, right? I may not be going through the problem, but when I see somebody else having an issue, can I empathize and therefore create something better? So I think empathy is a very powerful quality, And it's not about saying, oh, I'm sorry for you or poor little thing. That is sympathy, very different. That's pity, and then, you kind of put down the other person. But empathy, whether it's cognitive empathy, that I can understand where you're coming from, or emotional empathy, where, yeah, I can connect to the feeling even though I haven't gone through, or compassionate empathy, where I want to help you to get out, it can be hugely powerful. And it actually fuels performance and productivity. And there's a lot of research, and we actually found that leaders who report higher empathy actually get better results, more belonging, less attrition. And in fact, it's become an ask. We spoke about the younger generation. They want leaders who understand them. They want leaders who are able to communicate and understand what my world looks like. So it's not empathy and profits. It is, we talk in the book about balancing ambition and compassion. So I think it's a very critical quality for leaders to develop and practice, but not very easy. I run workshops on empathy, and everybody starts by saying, I'm very empathetic. But when we do these exercises, they realize that the responses they give actually don't show empathy at all. We like advising people, we like telling them what to do, but we rarely are willing to listen and say, yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
So I mean, Akshay, in your opinion today, for someone who's breaking into the field or coming in for the first time in the legal profession, what qualities do you look for, and what qualities do you think the person in today's day and age needs to develop in order to become successful in their sphere? And do you think that has changed since the time you've actually started? Or is it basically new wine in an old bottle?
I don't think it's changed a lot. I think to be a good lawyer, there are two things that I think are absolute must-haves. One is analytical thinking, which requires behind it curiosity. It requires a bit of humility that I don't know everything. But it also, the other thing is very, very important, is very good writing skills. And maybe AI is going to make that slightly less important. If you've got a good idea and you don't write so well, maybe AI will sort it out for you. But I think that good writing is usually a reflection of a good thought process. So I think those two things are essential. One of the favorite throwaway lines I like to say is that if you give me a really, really good English literature graduate from a good university who writes and thinks well, in 1 year they'll be a decent lawyer. Because I'm still looking up the law in books. I don't have all the knowledge in my head. But it's the way you think, the way you construct an argument, and the way you express that argument or your solution, which is more important than the actual knowledge in your head. And knowledge now is available to everyone at the click of a button. So those are the two things that matter most. So as I said, I looked over your shoulder and I saw generalization versus specialization. Yes. I think it's necessary to be a generalist before you can start specializing a bit, but you don't have to be a generalist in the law. You have to sort of generally have an interest in the world, and that will allow you to dig into specialization.
So do you think, just building on this approach, and both of you could please add your perspectives, this whole debate between specialists and generalists, or specialization and generalization, it seems that AI now coming in, seems to be really good at specialized kind of thinking. Does that mean that generalists will be back in fashion and will become more important, or do you think specialization itself has to be dealt with in a different way?
If I just think about the sorts of questions that I'm asked by clients today versus 20 years ago, they're quite different. The questions I was asked would be more specialized questions 20 years ago. So this is a very specific issue. How do I solve it? Versus I'm thinking of doing this in my business. What are your thoughts? So I think it's not so easy to be a generalist when you don't know very much. So one of the things people like to ask me is, I want to get into policy work. How do I get into policy work? I do a lot of that now. And I just think back to, even 10, 15 years ago, where I was hesitant in doing policy work because I thought I hadn't learnt enough yet. And I feel that, yes, there are some technical skills you can use for policy work, but it's experience of multiple transactions, pattern recognition. We are sort of small language models ourselves. What do you learn from all the patterns you've observed, and how can you pull them into a specific situation is it could be a specialized answer that you're giving, but you're using generalized knowledge to come up with that specialized answer. So I think that's the sort of dynamic I've seen switch in my own personal experience.
So there's definitely, please.
Sorry, just to add to that, I mean, again, just looking at it from, a corporate perspective, I think it's also a stage of life thing, right? Which stage of life in the corporate you are. Obviously, when you start off, you are a specialist, you either are a finance person, a marketing salesperson. But as you move into more generalist roles, I think, to me, the 2-3 things which are very important: are you able to ask the right kind of questions? Are you able to connect the dots? And are you able to inspire and take a bunch of people towards commonly aligned goals, right? So those become much more important than the specialist kind of things. And to your point, Akshay, I think AI is there today, which will help to support on some of the specialist areas. But when it comes to the more macro generalist areas, you still need the wisdom, the experience, the learning from your own years of having worked to be able to take it to the next level.
Also, just as an example, you might have exactly the same piece of advice that you want to give to the client, but the way you'll express it will be very different if they're a private equity client, a Japanese trading company, a utility in the UK. The way you would write that and the way you would express it is no amount of specialization is going to teach you how to express that answer. And also to anticipate that when that answer is received, how will it be digested and taken into the corporate framework and then acted upon? What really separates the very good from the excellent is a knowledge of that delta.
Great. And I'll ask you one last question before we go to questions. If there are no questions, we'll come back. Which is to build, if Rajesh, you can build on the point which Nirupama had said earlier. And let's, if you can just talk about how a leader can help an employee know themselves. Because
yeah, and I think, in fact, in many ways, the leader's responsibility is to help the employees get to know themselves. There are many ways in which it can be done. I know today there are a lot of assessment tools that we administer for employees as part of their leadership development journey, which gives a good insight into themselves, what are their values, what their beliefs are, strengths, opportunity areas, and so on and so forth. The second is by allowing employees to get some me time, right? Encouraging them to take time off, go on vacations, have some, what we used to do that, which is a learning hour every week. So you're just taking some time off where you're not encumbered by, meetings and calls and work, so that you're able to go a little bit of reflection that you're able to do to, understand yourself better. So that's another way to do it. I think having coaching and mentoring conversations, engagements is another very, very good way to sort of reflect for yourself and find, ways of getting to know yourself better. And, in the book also we talk about it. Many of the leaders talk about setting aside time and space for reflection, right? And through whichever mechanism that we want to use, but having some intentionality behind it versus just letting it happen on the side, in which case it never happens, right? So I think there are quite a few ways in which this can be done. And if we are able to all spend that time for our reflection, we are able to then become a much better version of ourselves.
That's very well said. I'd like to throw open the floor for questions. There seems to be quite a few, so I think we are in the right time.
Akshay sir, my question primarily for you. I'm currently in high school thinking of going into law as a career. And what I've been hearing a lot from teachers or my seniors is, with the advent of AI, law is changing. Like, how would it impact a law aspirant student like myself?
I think you're still catching AI at a young enough, early enough phase where I can, with good conscience, say if you're really want to go for it, and don't worry about what AI will do. Maybe in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, I won't be able to say that. But at the moment, I feel that if it's something you want to do, if I look at the way that young lawyers are working within the firm, they're not getting replaced by AI. They're working with AI. They are actually helping build the AI. We had 800 lawyers out of the 1,200 we have in the firm work on training our system before we launched it up front. So, I don't think you should worry about it. If it's something that interests you, you should do it. my personal advice, and if you're, to any parent who's in the room, forgive me if I'm being slightly subversive in saying this, but I still think it's better to do a bachelor's degree before doing law, because law is a professional degree. It's also quite abstract. So it's very difficult for a 16 or 17-year-old to know what law is and what even more so what the practice of law is. And I think, going back to my own experience, and I think many of us will feel the same way, the way that you mature between 18 and 21 in college is quite significant, and it improves your ability to make decisions outside of the family home when you're meeting people in university, etc. And if that is an option that's available, I would still encourage people to do that. And if you look at almost many of the larger law schools are now introducing 3-year BAs after an initial BA, because that allows you to discover yourself a little more and figure out what you want to do. As an employer, I've seen too many people sort of study law and never practice, or do it for a year or two and say, this is not for me. And I think part of the reason is they're being asked to choose too early.
Thank you so much.
Please, more questions. There's a lot. I think we...
First of all, I would like to thank you for such wonderful insights on the corporate world. So my question is that, what is that one quality that sets apart a leader from the follower?
I think maybe you could take that.
I mean, thank you for the question. And trying to narrow it down to one quality obviously is not easy. But I also believe life is all about making choices. So you have to really be specific about what is it that you would pick. I would pick probably the ability to inspire. Yeah, because today there is so many things happening in the world, and there is no one right answer, say for something like growth or performance or business goals, etc. So your ability to inspire and lead a diverse team towards a commonly aligned goal, I would say that's probably one thing that makes a leader stand out.
Thank you. Can I get other opinions also?
Please.
Can I get other?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
please.
So one of the things I've discovered is the ability to balance two very different aspects, polarities, right? So can you be disciplined and flexible? Can you be very ambitious and compassionate, right? Can you focus on yourself and focus on others? So leaders who are able to have the wisdom to balance two things that seem very opposite. For example, can you be really high tech but also be high touch? Don't forget the people. So if you have this ability to not be any one thing in extreme but balance this, I think that is a very critical leadership skill.
Please, the lady.
Hello.
I think
Yeah.
the lady in the front, please.
My question to Nirupama, what has been your experience on training leaders on emotional intelligence? Do you believe that all leaders can be trained on EI? EI, emotional and...
Yes. So as somebody who does that, yes, I do believe. But I think what a training program or an intervention can do is to make you aware. And it can give you some skills and tools. But how much you use it, whether you practice it on a daily basis, is a question of individual and personal choice. Like I said, I teach empathy. So everybody says, I know what empathy is. I understand how to have and express empathy. When I go back to work, it really depends upon, that's my being, whether I put it in practice. But I find every time I do workshops on emotional intelligence, the awareness itself is something that takes people forward to be a little more mindful the next time. Right? So it gives you some tools. How you use the tool, whether you choose to use the tool or not, is really up to you. But I strongly believe that awareness is the starting point, and that's what a training can help you to get.
Thank
Please,
you.
the gentleman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, I think this gentleman.
Okay, fine. Sorry. No problem.
Thank you, great panel. And I ask this question with all humility. I'm based out of Princeton, New Jersey, and I've been out of the country for 34 odd years, and I run few companies. As expected, very invested in HR, and so the questions. We talk about empathy, and then you have the whole concept of dugri, which is being brusque and rude in the Israeli firms. and that's expected to promote innovation. Then you have Morris Chang, who runs a $1.68 trillion Taiwan semiconductor company, and he doesn't believe in performance management system. Then you have this whole concept of product-led management, which Google and Tesla and others are using, where people are subordinated to ideas and products. So there's a decided theme going away from empathy and going away from platitudes. So how do we address that, and is that something that you're seeing?
I mean, if I can share my perspective on it, I think there are two parts to it, right? One is, how do you balance short-term and long-term, right? If you're looking for long-term, sustainable, holistic growth, I think there is a need for performance and purpose to go hand in hand. So somewhere, ultimately, while we can outsource some of the work to technology and all of that, the people need to be there for the points that we were earlier discussing, because that's what will also drive innovation, thinking, and so on and so forth. So our belief, when we speak to people and from what we have experienced, is in order to get long-term, sustainable, holistic kind of a growth, we need to have empathy and nurturing leadership as a very integral part of it. So that's one part of it. And I think the second one is, it's not this or that. I think ultimately, a lot of it is about the and. Like, you know, the point that she was making, ambition and compassion. Now, one could argue, if I just had ambition, can I succeed? Probably yes. But will I succeed for the long term in the right way? Because there is a how element to it as well. And probably that's where some things like compassion, vulnerability, humility, etc. comes into play. So I think it's a little bit of, one, having a long-term view, and two, managing the seeming polarities and having an and into the whole framework. That's my 2 bits on that one.
This gentleman over there.
I already have the mic. So good afternoon. My name is Shubhrajit, and I think Aritra will recognize me. I have spent almost 15 years in the corporate industry. Started off with Anand Bazaar, and then Hewlett Packard, Kodak India. I've seen many companies handle leadership roles, and now I'm serving the government of West Bengal in a senior management position. So I really loved the the discussion that the respective panelists shared today, and one point which kind of I thought that I might take your opinion on is, you spoke about the Gen Z and how to handle their views. Right, so maybe I'm even older than that. I belong to maybe Gen X because I'm from the 80s, kind of early 80s, so it's Gen X. So then there's Millennials, Z, and all these things. So my kid is there, my wife and my kid, they have come as well. So she's a 9-year-old. So she, I guess, is like Gen Alpha, if I'm not wrong, right? Alpha. The latest one, yeah. So she belongs from that age group now. So my question is, like, we've talked about the past. We are seeing the present. What are your thoughts about the future? Because when these kids, they will grow up and they will, come up to become entrepreneurs or corporate leaders, or maybe they can shine in any other field whatsoever. So what all qualities that you feel they should imbibe right from this age so that they can become good leaders of tomorrow, right? So that's a question which just came to my mind, and I just thought of putting it up to you.
It's a question I ask more than I answer, because I'm also a parent. And my kids are slightly older, but it's a similar kind of question. And I think the way that I'm seeing things work, and the way that, what do I want for my kids, and how do I sort of map that with my experience in the workplace? I think kids today probably want more of an opportunity to flexibility in their work, rather than to say, okay, I want to make a career or a profession in X. It's a question of who am I, what are the kinds of skills and inclinations that I have, and what are the types of things that I could be doing in which those skills or inclinations could find home. Because I'm finding that this thing of settling down and having a career is gone. Nobody really has that aspiration anymore. But we have a bunch of leaders and parents who are trying to use that idea to sort of imagine futures for their children. And I think it's trying to imagine, at least in my own experience, I've had to do this the hard way, try and want less specificity for them and more in terms of what is the opportunity landscape that this human being can have available to them is a question that I'm trying to ask myself and act upon more often than anything more specific.
Anything, any other questions? Still got more. I don't know if we have time. One last, okay, yes. One last.
So I would like to thank all of you for joining us here today. And my question is, if leadership ultimately lies with the people and leadership systems, they still fail people, what needs to change fundamentally to prevent this?
Okay, so that's one reason why we wrote this book, is to actually, first is understand yourself. And we say you can't serve from an empty vessel. Leaders who are insecure, anxious, fearful, unskilled cannot really inspire people, but they will lead to systemic failure. So that is the first part. The second is to actively want people to succeed and set up systems for that. And as Rajesh said, have a long-term view. So if you practice this mindset of nurturing yourself and being at a place where you're comfortable with who you are, you can help others, you can serve others. If you're running after, some imaginary goal from a place of fear, you are going to set up systems, as you said, where people will fail and they will not succeed. So, and then say, when others succeed, I succeed, as a reframing of your own mindset, that see it as success for others rather than I have to win, I have to succeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.
All.
Thank you so much to my fellow panelists. And I'd like to encourage you to all to buy these amazing books and to get them signed at the earliest, because this is your opportunity. These two books have been very transformative in my literary journey, I can tell you, having connected with business publications after a while. And I can tell you they are well worth it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.